Democrats plan to subpoena wealthy benefactors of Supreme Court justices. Senate Democrats announced plans Monday to vote to subpoena a pair of wealthy conservatives and a judicial activist who have underwritten or organized lavish travel for some Supreme Court justices, a move that adds to the pressure on the High Court to strengthen its ethics policies. Senate Judiciary Committee leaders said they would vote as soon as November 9 to authorize subpoenas for information from Texas billionaire Harlan Crow, a close friend and benefactor of Justice Clarence Thomas, and from Leonard Leo, the conservative judicial activist. Senate Democrats do not need the vote of any Republican on the committee to authorize the subpoenas. No separate vote by the full Senate is necessary. Democratic lawmakers are seeking detailed information about the full extent of Crow's gifts to Thomas. News reports about the justice's failure over many years to report private jet travel, real estate deals and other gifts from Crow have prompted calls for the court to strengthen its ethics rules and for greater transparency about the justice's potential conflicts and recusal decisions. By accepting these lavish, undisclosed gifts, the justices have enabled their wealthy benefactors and other individuals with business before the court to gain private access to the justices while preventing public scrutiny of this conduct, Judiciary Committee Chairman Richard J. Durbin, Democrat, Illinois, and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat, Rhode Island, said in the joint announcement. It is imperative that we understand the full extent of how people with interests before the court are able to use undisclosed gifts to gain private access to the justices. Senate Democrats have backed legislation that would impose disclosure rules on the court that are as strict as those that apply to members of the House and the Senate. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr. has suggested the court would act on its own as an independent branch of government to demonstrate to the public that it adheres to the highest standards of conduct. 3 other justices, Elena Kagan, Brett M. Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, have publicly stated in recent months that the court should or would adopt a formal ethics policy. In May, Senate committee leaders asked Crow for an itemized list of gifts he has made to Thomas that are worth more than $415, which is the maximum value allowed for gifts to federal judges, including the justices, that are not disclosed. The lawmakers also sought a full accounting of the lodging and transportation Crow has provided to the justice and his wife, Virginia Ginny Thomas. In response, Crow's attorney sent a letter saying the committee had not identified a valid legislative purpose for its investigation and did not have the power to probe his personal friendship with the justice. Through negotiations, Crow subsequently offered to provide the committee with responses to a subset of its requests, and only for the past 5 years, which the senators called inadequate. Crow has said he never tried to influence Thomas's decision-making on the court. Thomas has said he thought he did not need to disclose the free trips from a personal friend. In a statement Monday, Crow's office said he offered the committee extensive information despite the serious constitutional and privacy concerns presented to the committee, which were ignored and remain unaddressed. Crow's office asserted that the committee has already passed the legislation for which lawmakers say they need the requested information. It's clear this is nothing more than a stunt aimed at undermining a sitting Supreme Court justice for ideological and political purposes, Crow's office said. Leo struck a defiant tone in a statement Monday night, saying he would not bow to the vile and disgusting liberal McCarthyism that seeks to destroy the Supreme Court simply because it follows the Constitution rather than their political agenda. The committee said Monday that it would also vote to issue a subpoena to conservative donor Robin Arkley too. ProPublica reported that Arkley provided Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. with a free fishing trip to Alaska in 2008 that was organized by Leo. Alito has defended his decision not to disclose the trip in his annual financial report. Federal ethics law requires top officials from all branches of government, including Supreme Court justices, to file annual disclosures listing investments, gifts, and outside income. The justices are facing intense pressure from Democratic lawmakers and transparency advocates because they do not have an ethics policy that applies specifically to the 9 justices. The Chief Justice could fix this problem today and adopt a binding code of conduct, Durbin and Whitehouse added in their statement. As long as he refuses to act, the Judiciary Committee will. Separately, the Senate Finance Committee released a report last week after an investigation into a loan Thomas received from a friend to buy a luxury Prevost marathon motor coach in 1999, a transaction that was first reported by the New York Times. The committee's Democratic staff said in the report that Thomas made some interest payments on the $267,230 loan, but that it was declared settled by his friend, Anthony Welters, in 2008 without Thomas repaying a substantial portion, or perhaps any, of the principal. The Supreme Court will decide several cases this term that impact the future of free speech on social media platforms. The Supreme Court on Tuesday struggled to agree on how to determine when public officials can block critics from their private social media accounts, reviewing two cases that will have broad implications for citizen interactions with politicians online. All 9 justices seem to acknowledge the challenge and importance of defining when government employees are acting in an official capacity online, and therefore bound by First Amendment restrictions on censorship, and when they are acting as private citizens, with their own individual free speech rights. But there was no clear consensus on the answer after 3 hours of oral argument. The pair of cases before the justices presented a fresh opportunity for them to consider when public officials, in this case, 2 school board members in California and a city manager in Michigan, can bar critical voices from social media accounts that are increasingly used at all levels of government to communicate with citizens. They are part of a set of legal controversies the justices will review this term that will clarify the future of speech on social media platforms. The discussion on the bench did not break down along the usual ideological lines, but the court's 3 liberal justices voiced the strongest concerns about ensuring citizens have access to public officials and critical community information online. Justice Elena Kagan emphasized the increasing role of social media in elections and government operations. This is the forum for officials to talk to citizens, for citizens to talk to officials, for citizens to talk to each other, and it is becoming increasingly so, she said, adding that whatever rules the court writes for the future have to account for the big picture of how much is going to be happening in this forum and how much citizens will be foreclosed from participating in our democracy if they can be too easily blocked from various sites. The Biden administration backed the government officials in both cases, saying they had the right to block users from their private accounts, which they categorized as a type of private property, because they were not acting in an official capacity. Assistant Solicitor General Sulpan Joshi said blocking certain users from private accounts is no different than elected officials choosing to speak only to a private room full of Republicans, or Democrats, to get their views about government policies. I understand you can think of a lot of odious behavior by government officials being discriminatory in whom they speak to and whom they listen to, but, at the end of the day, the Constitution does not prohibit even odious behavior by private citizens, Joshi said. Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. and Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. pushed back on the government's suggestion that virtual social media accounts are comparable to an official's private physical property, where a politician, for instance, could hold a fundraiser or private discussion with like-minded constituents without violating the First Amendment. It doesn't cost anything to open a Facebook page, Alito said. To make so much turn on who owns the Facebook page seems quite artificial. Roberts also asked, in what sense is this really private property? It's just the gathering of the protons, or whatever they are, he said, drawing laughter from the courtroom. Should I be concerned about the fact that we have this old concept applied to what we always say is some new phenomenon? In the first case, Christopher and Kimberly Garnier, a Southern California couple who regularly posted critical messages on the Facebook pages of 2 school board members, were blocked from those pages, and then filed a lawsuit. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit sided with the Garniers in a broad ruling that said the decision of the school board members to block the couple could be considered a government action, because of the appearance and content of the school board members' Facebook pages. The board members, Michelle O'Connor Ratcliffe and T.J. Zane, regularly posted about school board meetings, surveys related to school district policy, the budget and public safety issues. Zane's page included a photo of a Poway Unified School District sign. O'Connor Ratcliffe labeled herself a government official on her page and provided a link to her school system email address. Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh pressed the attorney for the school board members about whether an official is acting in a government capacity when announcing rules, for instance, about parking during snowstorms or a town recycling schedule if the information is only available on the official's personal account, not the official government site. Local officials around the country need guidance, said Kavanaugh, whose wife is a town manager in Maryland. Hashim M. Mupan, an attorney for the board members, emphasized that government officials have the right to speak in their personal capacity about their jobs. The Garniers, according to the school board members, had spammed their accounts with repetitive, lengthy comments, leaving the same comment on multiple posts. Mupan said public officials can talk to their neighbors at church about government business or address campaign rallies without engaging in official government action. So too, he added, they can decide how to operate their private online accounts. Individuals who hold public office are still private citizens, he said. When acting in their personal capacity, they retain their First Amendment rights to decide who can participate in a community discussion that they host at their own property. The lengthy argument provided some insight into how the justices themselves use and think about social media. Justice Clarence Thomas declared himself not a Facebook person. Justice Sonia Sotomayor seemed very familiar with developments on the platform X, formerly known as Twitter, noting that it can block access, not just commenting privileges, to an account. In the second case, a different appeals court reached the opposite conclusion about when people can be blocked, based on a narrower test for evaluating the social media activity of elected officials. James Freed, the city manager of Port Huron, Michigan, was sued after he blocked a constituent's critical comments in response to a Facebook post about the city's coronavirus pandemic policies. Kevin Lindke said Freed violated the First Amendment when he deleted Lindke's comments and blocked his account. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, however, sided with Freed, who described himself on his Facebook page as a father, husband and city manager, and listed the city's website and general email as his contact information. Although Freed posted about city affairs, the overall content on the page he created before his appointment as city manager tended toward family activities, according to court filings. The Sixth Circuit held that a public official's social media activity is only state action when the employee is carrying out his or her official duties or acting under the government's authority. Throughout both arguments on Tuesday, the justices wrestled with how to define duty and authority. Several asked whether the terms include the customary expectations of government officials that are not specifically listed in law. This is all a question of how broadly do we define authority or duty, said Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who earlier suggested the question becomes more difficult when evaluating the actions of elected officials at the highest levels of government. For a governor or, President Trump, it's a harder call than someone like a police officer, who's a subordinate, she said. Or, my law clerk could just start posting things and say this is the official business of the Barrett chambers, right? And that wouldn't be okay, she added, with emphasis, to laughter from the courtroom. The High Court in 2021 did not take up a case in which a lower court had ruled that President Donald Trump could not block critics from his feed on Twitter. After Trump lost re-election, and Twitter canceled his account, the Supreme Court vacated the appeals court decision, saying the matter was moot. Pamela S. Karlan, co-director of Stanford Law School's Supreme Court Litigation Clinic and the attorney for the California couple, told the justices on Tuesday that the test should be to ask whether an official is doing his or her job. That prompted Alito to ask whether the local mayor at the grocery store is doing his job if he listens to supporters while he shops but tells a constituent with opposing views to call the office during normal business hours. An official pushing a shopping cart is clearly off-duty, Karlan responded. But maintaining a social media forum, in which people can comment and talk to one another about public business, she said, amounts to state action, subject to First Amendment constraints. Karlan acknowledged the free speech interests on both sides of the cases, but warned the court of devastating consequences for the public if they are denied access to the sites on which their officials are talking to them and asking for their reactions. The cases are O'Connor-Ratcliffe v. Garnier and Lindke v. Freed. Supreme Court skeptical of lawyers' claim to phrase Trump too small. Supreme Court justices across the ideological divide seemed skeptical Wednesday that a California lawyer has a free speech right to trademark the double entendre phrase Trump too small for use on t-shirts, criticizing former President Donald Trump. In fact, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. opined, ruling for Trump critic Steve Elster could make it harder for others to create their own takes about the man running to reclaim his old job. Presumably, there will be a race for people to trademark, Trump to this, Trump to that, whatever, the conservative Roberts told Elster's lawyer, Jonathan E. Taylor. That could put off limits political expression other people might regard as important infringement on their First Amendment rights. The debate among the justices mostly concerned how the court could rule for the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, which said Elster's request violated a law disallowing trademarks that use a person's name without their consent, but not impose unwanted consequences for other areas of the law, such as copyrights for book titles that use a person's name. The bottom line, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said, was that Elster did not suffer an injury when his trademark request was denied. The question is this an infringement on speech? And the answer is no, the liberal Sotomayor said, adding that the government is not telling him he can't use the phrase, just that he can't trademark it. There's no limitation on him selling it. So there's no traditional infringement. Indeed, the shirt is widely available to order on the internet. The phrase draws from a locker room taunt during the 2016 presidential campaign. Tired of Trump's use of Little Marco, Senator Marco Rubio, Republican, Florida, mentioned the size of Trump's hands during a campaign stop. You know what they say about men with small hands, Rubio told a crowd in Salem, Virginia, in February 2016, pausing to let the audience laugh. You can't trust them. Trump responded during a televised presidential debate days later with a remarkable claim that drew headlines unseen in any previous presidential campaign. Look at those hands, are they small hands? Trump said, raising them for viewers to see. And, he referred to my hands, if they're small, something else must be small. I guarantee you there's no problem. I guarantee. Elster wanted to trademark the Trump too small phrase to criticize the size of Trump's package of policy proposals. A unanimous panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled in his favor last year, saying the prohibition on violating a person's privacy was outweighed by Elster's First Amendment right to criticize public officials. The government has no valid publicity interest that could overcome the First Amendment protections afforded to the political criticism embodied in Elster's mark, wrote Judge Timothy B. Dyke. As a result of the president's status as a public official, and because Elster's mark communicates his disagreement with and criticism of the then-president's approach to governance, the government has no interest in disadvantaging Elster's speech. The case is the latest to come before the Supreme Court involving challenges to trademark denials. In each of the previous cases, those seeking registration successfully argued that the government was wrong to reject their requests as offensive. In Madel v. Tam, government officials refused an Asian American band's request to trademark their name The Slants, saying it would violate a ban on disparaging marks. In Iancu v. Brunetti, the trademark office denied registration to clothing company FUCT because of a prohibition on immoral or scandalous marks. Trump is not a party to the current suit, and his privacy was defended by the Biden administration. Career Justice Department lawyer Malcolm L. Stewart, arguing his 100th case before the court, made the case that a trademark is a benefit awarded by the government, and consent by an individual to use of his or her name is not an undue burden on speech. The living individual clause simply restricts Mr. Elster's ability to assert exclusive rights in another person's name, he said, and is viewpoint neutral. Even if the justices seemed generally to think the government should prevail, some looked for an easier way to rule than deciding whether a trademark was a benefit the government was free to restrict. The extent of the government's authority to attach conditions to government benefits is a very difficult area of constitutional law and potentially quite a dangerous one, said Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr., who had made a similar argument in the court's previous considerations of trademark law. Perhaps our precedent should be extended to cover this situation, but this is quite unlike any of the other cases that we have had concerning that. Justices Clarence Thomas and Amy Coney Barrett pressed Stewart about how his argument might affect copyright law, which doesn't require a person's consent. Let's imagine that there's a similar restriction for copyright and somebody wants to write a book called Trump Too Small that details Trump's pettiness over the years and just argues that he's not a fit public official, said Barrett, who coincidentally was Trump's third and final appointment to the Supreme Court. Are you saying, she asked Stewart, that the government could restrict the author from using Trump's name? Stewart said he thought it possible to make distinctions. Copyright law has historically been viewed as the engine of free expression, Stewart said, while trademarks have been seen as necessary to foster the free flow of commerce and to allow consumers to recognize which goods are manufactured by which merchants. Barrett did not seem persuaded, but Elster's lawyer Taylor had the harder outing. He told the court that the government's sole interest in denying the trademark is protecting the feelings of famous people. But that is not a legitimate reason to burden protected speech. But Thomas pressed Taylor to detail what speech precisely is being burdened. When Taylor said Elster was being denied government protection that is routinely given to others, Sotomayor said he seemed to be making the government's case that the decision was about a restriction on benefits, not on speech. After additional questions, Justice Elena Kagan told Taylor she did not want to badger you or anything. But she said he had failed to find a case supporting his proposition that when the law does not favor one viewpoint over another, government cannot make distinctions when government is only giving out a benefit and not restricting any speech. The case is Vidal versus Elster. Trump Jr. testifies, deflects responsibility in New York business fraud case. New York, Donald Trump Jr. testified Wednesday afternoon in a multimillion-dollar civil case that accuses him, his father and other Trump Organization executives of cheating in business deals, saying he was not directly involved in the production of financial statements. The former president's son is the first member of his family to be called as a witness by the Office of New York Attorney General Letitia James, Democrat, in its $250 million fraud lawsuit against the family and the company. James's lawsuit accuses Donald Trump and his executives of inflating his financial statements to secure better terms. During his testimony, Trump Jr. said the responsibility of preparing financial statements rested with Mazars USA, the company's longtime accounting firm. These people had an incredibly intimate knowledge, and I relied on them, Trump Jr. said. His testimony marked the beginning of a new, more high-profile phase in the trial, in which multiple members of the family, including Trump, are expected to take the witness stand in the coming days and address the allegations against their company. Trump Jr. is one of the defendants in the trial, which began on October 2. He is expected to continue testifying Thursday and is also expected to be summoned back to the stand later in the case by his own attorneys. His brother Eric Trump, also a defendant in the case, is scheduled to testify on Thursday as well. Their father is set to testify Monday, followed by their sister Ivanka Trump 2 days later, though she is appealing an order directing her to take the stand. The family's dynamics and business's practices are expected to be on display in the coming weeks as they and the Trump Organization as a whole face scrutiny in a Manhattan courtroom. James's lawsuit alleges that Donald Trump, his executives, and his adult sons committed a decade-long fraud to inflate his net worth by billions to get better rates from lenders and insurance firms. The Trump family and their lawyers have denied any wrongdoing, with the defense maintaining that there was no fraud committed. Defense attorneys have said that real estate valuations are subjective and that lenders did not rely on Trump's annual statements of net worth to make their decisions on loans. Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, who is running the company, remain defendants in the case, while Ivanka Trump was dismissed as a defendant in an appellate decision in June. Before the trial, New York Supreme Court Justice Arthur Engoron ruled that the defendants and the company broadly committed fraud. The trial, which will be decided by the judge and not a jury, is examining whether the defendants committed specific illegal acts in the course of committing fraud. The case has the potential to essentially stifle Donald Trump's ability to conduct business in New York, by restricting the ability of officers to do their jobs and by preventing the company from obtaining new loans and from acquiring new properties. It is a civil case, not a criminal one, so no one involved faces any time behind bars as a result. When he took the stand Wednesday, Trump Jr. discussed his background, including his education and work with the Trump Organization. During his testimony, Trump Jr. said he had no significant knowledge of the accounting standards known as the Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, GAAP. Evidence at the trial has shown that financial statements prepared by the Trump Organization and distributed to business partners between 2011 and 2021 did not comply with those rules. I have no understanding of accounting guidelines. That's what we have CPAs for, Trump Jr. said, referring to certified public accountants. Trump Jr. arrived in the courtroom with a confident stride Wednesday afternoon. While his testimony got underway, he avoided the more bombastic stance he has displayed on social media and in television interviews. He maintained his composure on the stand, though his patience seemed to wane as the questions continued throughout the afternoon. Leaving the room during an afternoon break, he paused to hover over the courtroom sketch artist's work, looking at her drawing of him. Trump Jr. and Engoron shared a laugh Wednesday over his testimony that he knows nothing about accounting rules. His only knowledge of GAAP, Trump Jr. said, is that it covers common accounting procedures. He learned that in his Introduction to Accounting course at the Wharton School years ago, he said. Trump Jr.'s father was called to the witness stand briefly last week for a much less lighthearted moment. Donald Trump was summoned in an impromptu hearing over whether he had violated a gag order Engoron imposed barring him from making public comments about the judge's court staff. The limited gag order in the case came after Trump had posted to social media about a member of the judge's staff, including a photograph. Then, last week, Trump spoke to reporters in the hallway outside the courtroom, as he often does, and assailed Engoron, a Democrat, as a very partisan judge. He also said there was a person who's very partisan sitting alongside of him, perhaps even more partisan. Engoron soon summoned Trump to the stand. Trump said his remark was not about one of the judge's staff members, but instead was aimed at Michael Cohen, a Trump attorney turned nemesis who testified earlier that same day. Trump said he was talking about Cohen, but then added of the staff member that he felt she was very biased against us. Engoron said he did not find Trump's defense credible, fining him $10,000. Trump has appeared at the civil trial several times, even though he isn't required to do so. He has grimaced during testimony, delivered campaign-style remarks to reporters outside the courtroom and complained repeatedly on social media about what he claims is improper meddling in his private business affairs by James, a Democrat. Trump, who is seeking the 2024 GOP presidential nomination, is facing 4 criminal prosecutions in other jurisdictions. He has insisted he is being targeted for political reasons. He has also criticized Engoron, calling him a political hack and protesting that some of his offspring have to appear in court. "Leave my children alone, Engoron," Trump posted on social media early Wednesday. "You are a disgrace to the legal profession." Berman reported from Washington. NC Republicans pass redistricting map expected to flip 3 House seats. In a move that could solidify GOP power in the state for years to come, North Carolina Republicans passed new congressional and state legislative maps Wednesday that could flip 3 or 4 U.S. House seats, while easing a path for the party to hold on to veto-proof majorities over state legislation. Critics of the map say it weakens democracy by limiting the power of black and brown voters and crafting districts into GOP strongholds that curb Democratic voters' influence. North Carolina is now one of the most egregiously gerrymandered states in the country, said Eric Holder, the former U.S. Attorney General and current head of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. Proponents say they are allowed to draw maps that favor political parties because of recent court precedent, and that Republicans have the power to do so because they won more seats in both chambers. "The chickens are coming home to roost for the Democrats," said Paul Shoemaker, a senior Republican consultant in North Carolina. Elections have consequences. The Republican redistricting of North Carolina is the party's latest attempt to redefine congressional voting districts nationwide as cases across the South, including in Alabama and South Carolina, face legal challenges. The newly enacted districts come almost a year after the state Supreme Court flipped from Democratic to Republican control in the 2022 elections, and GOP justices ruled in April that redistricting for partisan gain was constitutional under state law. That decision reversed a ruling a year earlier from the state's highest court that threw out proposed boundaries because of what it saw as illegal partisan gerrymandering. The map creates 10 likely Republican districts, 3 likely Democratic districts, and 1 that appears to be competitive, according to statewide election data. North Carolina's 14 congressional seats are evenly split between Democrats and Republicans after a temporary map was created following the top court's decision to throw out a Republican-proposed map. The new map would probably flip at least 3 of those seats to the GOP, which could also help give them control in a U.S. House where Republicans hold a narrow 221 to 212 majority. The 3 or 4 seat swing is significant even for partisan gerrymanders, experts say, showing how court elections can significantly alter the direction of a state and, potentially, control of the U.S. House. In an analysis of recent elections in North Carolina, Duke University mathematics professor Jonathan Mattingly, who studies the effects of gerrymandering, found that electoral outcomes under the Republican maps wouldn't reflect voters' changing preferences, even when Democrats overperform. If the opinion of the people changes sufficiently, who is elected should change, Mattingly said. These maps are non-responsive. With them, the elections have no consequences. That's not really democracy. Andrew Taylor, a NC State University political science professor and the director of the Free and Open Societies Project, said the North Carolina legislature has some of the most leeway of any in the country to enact new voting districts, though it is subject to existing federal law. Taylor, who has previously served as an expert witness for Republicans, said he expects legal challenges to follow the bill's passage. Experts across North Carolina agree that legal challenges will be forthcoming, alleging that the redistricted maps are racially gerrymandered and unlawful under the Voting Rights Act because they don't allow black voters to fairly elect their representatives. Morgan Jackson, a Democratic strategist in the state, said he thinks there's likely a viable path to challenge the new map on the grounds that it dilutes the black vote after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled Alabama's new congressional map was unconstitutional for that reason. That's in addition to the aggressive gerrymander he says will limit Democratic voters' influence statewide. They've taken essentially a 50-50 state and drawn a map where 80% of voters will have a Republican member of Congress, said Jackson, the Democratic Party strategist. Some advocates and organizations in North Carolina have started analyzing the maps for possible pathways to file lawsuits. That includes Hillary Klein from the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, who wrote in a letter to state GOP leaders that the state Senate legislative districts effectively dilute the black vote in at least 2 seats. It is clear as day, Klein said. Anybody who knows anything about North Carolina knows the Senate map is going to deprive North Carolina's black belt of any representation. Mattingly's analysis also found that the maps probably will help Republicans hold on to majorities, and potentially veto-proof majorities, in both chambers. The redistricting is also likely to help Republicans' attempts to keep the seat of Representative Tricia Cotham, who switched from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party in April, giving the GOP a razor-thin supermajority. Republicans have defended their maps, arguing that they reversed Democratic judicial overreach and that Democrats would similarly redraw maps to favor their side. They also argued that drawing maps favoring a political party is legal, according to the state's highest court. During debate on the maps, they instead argued that Democrats must try to appeal to rural voters. We have complied with the law in every way on these maps, Republican State Representative Destin Hall said. Our overarching goal in the creation of this House plan was to create Republican-leaning districts where possible. In the U.S. House, the plan could squeeze out Democratic Representatives Jeff Jackson, Wiley Nickel and Kathy E. Manning, while freshman Representative Donald G. Davis would run in the one competitive district. Davis is one of 3 black Democrats from the state in the House. Once again, this General Assembly has enacted maps that racially gerrymander North Carolinians in an effort to ensure a predetermined outcome, large majorities for Republicans in both chambers, and an outsized share of the congressional delegation in a purple state, said State House Minority Leader Robert Reeves in a statement. Governor Roy Cooper, Democrat, has also come out against the proposals, though the redistricting is not subject to his veto. They have used race and political party to create districts that are historically discriminatory and unfair, Cooper said in a statement. North Carolina is just over a fifth black, according to U.S. Census data. Republican lawmakers said they did not use racial demographic data to create the districts. How the Republican lawmakers created the maps, though, is unclear. Because of a recently passed budget resolution, communications about the redistricting process among state lawmakers are not subject to Freedom of Information requests, making it more difficult for the public to know what was considered with the maps. Legislators can destroy their communications concerning the map's design when they see fit. Top Republican lawmakers and aides involved in the process did not immediately respond to a request for comment Wednesday. In 2022, when the state Supreme Court threw out Republicans' proposed map, those communications proved relevant in the legal challenges to showing that, according to the court, the new borders were illegal partisan gerrymanders. U.S. Representative Deborah K. Ross, Democrat, North Carolina, said Republicans made the change so they could legislate in a much more secretive way. This is not only a power grab, but it's a power grab under the cover of darkness, Ross told the Washington Post. The change is one of many the Republicans have instituted since taking a veto-proof majority. The legislature has also faced lawsuits over voting laws and election boards. Colorado judge weighs if Trump incited an insurrection, can run again. Denver, a Colorado judge is weighing whether Donald Trump incited an insurrection and is barred from running for president again. During a hearing this week, she has heard about 19th-century constitutional debates, how and when the National Guard is deployed, free speech rights and jokes cracked by Trump advisors about the January 6, 2021, attack on the U.S. Capitol. The case, one of many challenging Trump's ability to serve under an 1868 provision of the Constitution, stands out because the judge overseeing it is holding an unusual week-long trial to help make up her mind. She has heard from constitutional scholars, police officers who were assaulted on January 6, an election official and Trump advisors who met with the outgoing president days before the riot. Denver District Judge Sarah B. Wallace is expected to rule this month, as cases in other states move along briskly. On Monday, Trump filed a lawsuit in Michigan after a judge declined to let him intervene in a case seeking to prevent him from appearing on the ballot there. On Wednesday, a federal judge threw out a challenge in New Hampshire. And on Thursday, the Minnesota Supreme Court heard arguments over his ability to run there. All of the cases center on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which bans people from holding office if they engaged in an insurrection after swearing an oath to the Constitution. It was ratified 3 years after the Civil War ended to prevent Confederates from holding office. The lawsuits argue that Trump incited armed supporters to attack the Capitol to prevent Congress from certifying Joe Biden's victory. Trump's attorneys contended he did not inspire or participate in an insurrection, and they summoned his former advisors to the stand to testify. Trump wanted 10,000 or more National Guard members in Washington on January 6 to guarantee the protest was peaceful. Kash Patel, who served as Chief of Staff to Acting Defense Secretary Christopher C. Miller, testified Wednesday that Trump authorized 10,000 to 20,000 National Guard members to assist law enforcement days before the January 6 attack. About 340 were deployed that day to assist with traffic control and other minor tasks, but more weren't sent because local authorities did not ask for further assistance, Patel testified. Absent those requests, we were under the advisement of our legal offices, counsels that we could not activate the National Guard, Patel said. His comments were at odds with testimony a day earlier from Syracuse University law professor William Banks, an expert on national security and counterterrorism. Banks testified that Trump as president had broad powers to send the D.C. National Guard, FBI, Secret Service, Department of Homeland Security and other law enforcement agencies to the Capitol to help quell the violence without authorization from anyone else. He would need no request or permission from anyone else, Banks said of Trump's ability to send the National Guard. Banks said there was nothing in the public record showing Trump had authorized thousands of National Guard troops. He noted the president commands the D.C. National Guard and said he should have deployed troops by early afternoon, as soon as he learned of the violence at the Capitol. Trump did not act for hours. Former Trump spokeswoman Katrina Pearson said she was brought in to help with the January 6 rally a few days beforehand because of infighting among the organizers. She said Trump told her at a January 4 meeting that he wanted 10,000 National Guard members present to prevent problems. He goes, "Let's just have 10,000 National Guard and then that way we won't have any problems," she testified. On cross-examination, lawyer Eric Olson displayed a copy of text messages between Pearson and Max L. Miller, who was a Trump aide at the time and was elected to Congress last year. In one message after the Trump meeting, Miller told Pearson that he was just glad we killed the National Guard and a procession. Pearson reacted to the comment with a heart emoji. In another message, Pearson made light of the attack on the Capitol less than 24 hours after it happened by sending Miller a photo of a rioter hauling the lectern for then-House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, California, through a hallway. "You have to admit that seeing Nancy Pelosi's lectern being carried away by a Trump supporter is pretty damn funny," she wrote. Asked on the stand about the message Wednesday, Pearson said, "Yes, it was hysterical." Amy Kramer, chairwoman of Women for America First and one of the organizers of the January 6 rally on the Ellipse, testified on Thursday that the crowd that had gathered to hear the president was peaceful and upbeat. She called them patriotic, freedom-loving Americans. "It was just a happy, joyful occasion, and you could see it on people's faces," she testified. Later, lawyers for those bringing the lawsuit showed a video of Trump urging his supporters to march to the Capitol and summon the crowd soon after yelling, "Invade the Capitol." Kramer said she had never seen the video before and said those who attacked the Capitol were not patriotic. "I can't speak to everyone in that crowd, but the people who breached the Capitol, no, they were not happy warriors," she said. She described the events at the Capitol as a riot, not an insurrection, and said she had no concerns that Trump would ever encourage violence. "That's not who he is," she said. Those bringing the lawsuit have dedicated part of the week to arguing that January 6 qualified as an insurrection. Gerard Magliosa, an Indiana University law professor who has studied the 14th Amendment, cited an 1828 dictionary to show that insurrection was defined at the time as rising against civil or political authority and the open and active opposition of a number of persons to the execution of law in a city or state. Members of Congress in the 1860s believed that a person did not have to take up arms to participate in an insurrection and that speech alone could qualify one as an insurrectionist, he said. Magliosa noted that Congress declined to seat one member because he had written a letter to the editor in support of the Confederacy and another because he had given $100 to his son before he joined the Confederacy. In the first days of the hearing, those bringing the lawsuit have played well-known clips of Trump, including ones where he told the far-right Proud Boys to stand back and stand by, urged supporters on January 6 to fight like hell and claimed there were very fine people on both sides at a 2017 rally that featured white supremacists and counter-protesters. Peter Simi, an associate professor of sociology at Chapman University who has studied political extremism, testified that Trump's far-right supporters viewed Trump's January 6 speech as a call to violence because he repeatedly said they needed to fight and were at risk of losing their country. During that speech, Trump also said they should peacefully and patriotically protest. Simi said extremists put little stock in that comment, in part because Trump put far more attention on fighting than acting peacefully. In far-right extremist culture, fighting is to be taken literally, he said. Trump attorney Scott Gessler downplayed the use of the word fight, noting that the phrase is commonly used by politicians. He played a montage of Pelosi, Vice President Harris, and other high-profile Democrats telling their supporters to fight. He asked the judge to dismiss the case on First Amendment grounds, saying Trump didn't incite the crowd. The judge declined the request and is scheduled to hear testimony and arguments through Friday. On Thursday, the Minnesota Supreme Court heard arguments in a similar case. Justices asked pointed questions about whether states should be wading into this debate or if this was a question best left for Congress. Throughout the hearing, which lasted about 90 minutes, they noted that clause does not specifically state whether it applies to the presidency, and they debated what constituted involvement in a rebellion against the Constitution. Chief Justice Natalie E. Hudson said she was concerned about the prospect of creating just chaos if the question is decided differently by various states. You have the potentiality of 50 different states, depending on the nature of the statutes in those states, deciding this question differently, deciding whether states have the right to determine who's eligible for national office, and that concerns me, she said. Ron Fine, an attorney for the voters who brought the lawsuit with the help of the group Free Speech for People, said it was the duty of the court to answer the eligibility question. Nicholas Nelson, a lawyer for Trump, said the question was political, not judicial. Trump's legal team has sought dismissal of the case. Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon has not taken a position on the merits of the case, and an attorney representing the office told the justices that a decision needed to be made by January 5 to prepare for the election. The case could be sent to a lower court judge to develop a fuller record before the justices reach a final decision. In another case, a federal judge on Wednesday threw out a challenge to Trump's candidacy in New Hampshire brought by John Anthony Castro, a self-described long-shot Republican candidate for president who is bringing a slew of lawsuits trying to bounce Trump from the ballot state by state. Judge Joseph N. LaPlante dismissed the New Hampshire case, writing that Castro didn't have the authority to bring the lawsuit because he wasn't actively campaigning for president and has not provided any evidence suggesting that he has voters or contributors in New Hampshire or anywhere else. What's more, the judge ruled that Congress and presidential electors, not courts, are the ones to determine whether candidates are eligible to serve as president. The cases across the country are moving relatively quickly because states will begin holding caucuses and primaries in January. If any state knocks Trump off the ballot, the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to weigh in and resolve the issue for all states. Sanchez reported from Phoenix. Republican effort to impeach Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice loses steam. Madison, Wisconsin, Republican lawmakers in this political battleground state appear to be easing off an effort to impeach a new liberal state Supreme Court justice who in her campaign promoted abortion rights and condemned gerrymandering. Shortly after Janet Protasiewicz was sworn into office in August, Wisconsin State Assembly Speaker Robin Vos, Republican, said he would consider impeaching her if she did not remove herself from a case challenging the state's legislative districts. Protasiewicz repeatedly called those districts rigged in favor of Republicans during her campaign, and Vos contended she had prejudged the issue. On Friday, Protasiewicz in a lengthy decision said she would not step aside in the case, writing that she had expressed her views on gerrymandering but had not specified how she would rule on a particular case. But rather than move ahead with impeachment proceedings, as threatened, Vos fell silent. Wisconsin is the latest state to exemplify the increasingly high stakes at play in judicial races. Protasiewicz, her opponent, political parties and interest groups spent more than $50 million on the race, the most ever on a judicial race in the country's history. Protasiewicz's victory ended 15 years of conservative control of the court and gave liberals a 4-3 majority that could issue decisions affecting abortion rights, voting policies, environmental regulations, and the certification of the next presidential election. Her decision to remain on the case raises the likelihood the court will redraw the district lines before next year's election. Republicans view the case as an existential threat to their large majorities in the legislature, but Vos's reaction to Protasiewicz's decision to remain on the case was restrained. On Friday and through the weekend, the speaker remained quiet. On Monday, Vos issued a short written statement that said she should have recused herself but didn't mention impeachment. On Tuesday, documents were made public that showed a conservative former state Supreme Court justice tasked with advising Vos concluded that impeachment was not warranted. To sum up my views, there should be no effort to impeach Justice Protasiewicz on anything we know now, former Justice David Prosser wrote in a Friday memo to Vos. Vos in recent days has not responded to questions about whether he is still considering impeachment. The idea has divided Republicans, and attempting it would prove more difficult now that Prosser has determined it isn't warranted. State Senator Dewey Strobel, Republican, one of the most conservative lawmakers in Wisconsin, told Milwaukee's CBS affiliate in remarks reported Tuesday that he opposed impeaching Protasiewicz, in part because Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers, Democrat, could replace her with someone else. Republicans hold 22 of the 33 seats in the state Senate, exactly the number needed to remove an official who has been impeached by the state assembly. Losing a single Senate vote could be fatal to their efforts because all Democrats are expected to rally behind Protasiewicz. Republicans in the state assembly hold 64 of 99 seats, well above the 50 votes they would need to impeach Protasiewicz. An impeachment would immediately bar Protasiewicz from acting on any cases and trigger intense pressure on the state Senate to hold a vote on whether to remove Protasiewicz or let her continue to serve. Vos last month said he had formed a panel of former justices to advise him on impeachment but declined to name who was on it. The watchdog group American Oversight last month filed a lawsuit arguing the group of former justices was subject to the state's open meetings law and had to conduct its work in public. In response to that lawsuit, Prosser released his memo and other documents. He also provided American Oversight with text messages and voice messages from former Chief Justice Patience Roggensack that suggest she has worked on the issue with Prosser. Those messages do not reveal her views on impeachment, but in one voice message she argued the group of former justices were not subject to the open meetings law. "We're just ad hoc people who have an interest in what's going on," she said. The threats to impeach Protasiewicz have come alongside an effort to remove the state's nonpartisan elections director, Megan Wolfe, from her job. Republicans in the state Senate last month voted to fire her, but lawyers for the legislature told them they didn't have the power to do that. Wolfe has continued in her job, and Wisconsin Attorney General Josh Kaul, Democrat, has filed a lawsuit to try to ensure she keeps her position. In response, some Republicans have contended they should impeach Wolfe. How Hannity, Bannon and others on the right helped fuel GOP speaker chaos. Conservative media stars have had enormous influence over Republicans' futile search for a leader. Fox News host Sean Hannity vented to his millions of viewers Monday night about the state of the Republican effort to name a new House Speaker, taking special aim at the few sensitive little snowflakes in Congress who were not supporting his preferred GOP candidate, Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio. But the widely watched conservative pundit wasn't only using his televised bully pulpit to pressure the holdouts. Hannity also spent the weekend personally calling several and having one of his producers reach out to others to lobby them on their vote. He also took to social media to encourage his followers to call wavering members and demand they fall into line. Hannity's effort to personally whip up votes for Jordan highlights the central role that right-wing media has played in the weeks-long drama engulfing Capitol Hill over who will wield the speaker's gavel. At each turn, conservative media figures such as Hannity and former Trump advisor Stephen K. Bannon have injected high-profile disruption into a process that normally plays out quietly behind the scenes in Capitol Hill corridors. A handful of backbench lawmakers have seized the opportunity to flex their power in a nearly evenly split chamber, creating drama but offering little direction. As of Tuesday afternoon, when Jordan lost an initial vote of the full House, it was unclear whether the turbulent series of events would end with a congressman long relegated to the hard-right fringe elevated to lead the chamber. But the overall picture of the legislative branch in chaos, and the allure of the media spotlight helping to drive the dysfunction, was well established. Politics today rewards attention and money more than it rewards actually getting bills passed into law, said Mac Thornberry, a 13-term congressman from Texas who was the top Republican on the House Armed Services Committee before announcing his retirement in 2019. Thornberry likened the shift to a social media algorithm that serves up ever more outrageous content to get more eyeballs. Now to keep your attention, politicians have to be all the more sensational, he said. I fear we are in a spiral. The uncertainty over who would preside over the House began this month when Representative Kevin McCarthy, Republican, California, was ousted by a band of rebellious hard-right members. The leader, Representative Matt Gaetz, Republican, Florida, had become a right-wing media star based on his willingness to topple the established order. Then House Republicans' original preferred replacement, Representative Steve Scalise, Republican, Louisiana, had to withdraw from contention after failing to consolidate the support of hard-right members and the media figures who back them. Now Hannity and others are leaning on Jordan's critics to get behind the Ohio congressman, who has long been a favorite of Fox News and other conservative outlets. The campaign by Hannity to boost Jordan, who has also been endorsed for the speaker's job by former President Donald Trump, began soon after Scalise withdrew from the race. On Friday afternoon, Hannity tweeted that any member of Congress would be crazy to not support Jim Jordan for Speaker. He is a natural-born, principled leader who will lead House Republicans to unite versus the radical left. Hannity went on to provide the switchboard number for the House of Representatives, and urged his followers to call your member and tell them. Over the weekend, Hannity reached out to several holdout lawmakers who were not supporting Jordan, while one of his producers contacted lawmakers with an email asking why they weren't backing him. The producer's email, which was first reported by Axios and has been confirmed by the Washington Post, included a leading question. Hannity would like to know why during a war breaking out between Israel and Hamas, with a war in Ukraine, with the wide-open borders, with a budget that's unfinished, why would Rep. XXX be against Rep. Jim Jordan for Speaker? Hannity has been joined in his quest by other high-profile hosts, including Bannon, who has helped to spur the pressure campaign for Jordan on his podcast, War Room. After the Republican caucus nominated Jordan on Friday, Bannon ran a segment on his show publicizing the congressional phone number of Representative Steve Womack, Republican, Arkansas, who had hesitated to support Jordan. Bannon urged his listeners to tell Womack to support Jordan. You're in a super MAGA district, you gotta get your mind right, Bannon said. On Monday, Gaetz praised Bannon's audience for deluging Republican lawmakers with phone calls urging them to get on what Gaetz called the Jordan train. But in a measure of the limits of those kinds of pressure tactics, Womack on Tuesday was among the 20 Republicans who declined to support Jordan in the floor vote. Womack, who voted for Scalise instead, said the GOP's initial nominee had been kneecapped before he could get his own vote before the full House. It was the most egregious act against a sitting member of our conference I have witnessed, he said. Other efforts to flip votes were more successful. When Representative Mike D. Rogers, Republican, Alabama, who had been a leading Jordan holdout, announced that he would instead back Jordan on Monday, Gaetz broke the news on Bannon's show and it seems as though Congressman Rogers has been sufficiently encouraged, Gaetz said. Some members have been unusually outspoken in blasting their colleagues for playing to the cameras. Representative Mike Collins, Republican, Georgia, tweeted last week that his fellow members were making decisions based on egos and TV time. McCarthy, meanwhile, was unequivocal in identifying what he saw as the reasons Gates had moved against him. It had nothing to do about spending, he told reporters shortly after his ouster. It all was about getting attention from you. The dynamic of attention seeking over substance may be more pronounced than it has been in the past, but it is not new. For a long time we've seen politicians who have vied for media attention in order to raise their profile and raise money, said Catherine Brownell, who teaches history at Purdue University. It elevates a slash-and-burn style and it changes the party to something more about viral moments and less about governance. In the case of the speaker fight, the consequence has been a string of firsts that hint at the underlying chaos, the first 15-round speaker election in nearly 2 centuries when McCarthy was chosen in January, the first ouster of a speaker by a vote of the House when he was deposed this month, and the first vacancy in over half a century to last 2 weeks or more. Eric Bolling, a host for the conservative network Newsmax, said that in recent decades, the biggest media darlings tend to be the ones who get elected, promoted and rise the highest in the political ranks. Chris Stirewalt, a former politics editor at Fox News, noted that the selection of a new speaker is, and should be, a very boring moment to most Americans. Under normal circumstances, most Americans can't name the Speaker of the House. But this time, Stirewalt said, the story has become a personal drama seemingly made for reality television, with the entertainment wing of the GOP fueling the action. The battle between Scalise and Jordan last week was not an ideological struggle, added Stirewalt, who is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and political editor at NewsNation. It's an attitudinal struggle. Scalise and Jordan are both conservatives, but Jordan was willing to do things that Scalise wasn't to try to secure the job. Previous Republican speakers have had tortured tenures as they have attempted to govern in the face of factions trying to wield outsized power by leveraging their influence on the airwaves. For instance, unlike McCarthy, John A. Boehner, Republican, Ohio, wasn't voted out of office. But he did step aside under pressure in 2015 after the Freedom Caucus, led in part by Jordan and backed by Fox, made the Republican conference ungovernable. There's a tendency to blame the fringe of the Republican Party. But those people used to be the fringe and they climbed the party ladder using the same tactics, said Brownell, author of the book 24/7 Politics, Cable Television and the Fragmenting of America from Watergate to Fox News. A case in point is Newt Gingrich, who was Speaker during the late 1990s. After Gates began pushing for McCarthy's ouster this fall, Gingrich wrote an opinion piece accusing Gates of destroying the House GOP's ability to govern. Such allegations are ironic coming from Gingrich, Brownell said, given that Gingrich's rise was largely fueled by his own battlefield mentality in Congress and his willingness to court media attention. It changed the party, making it more about the attention economy and less about governance, she said. When McCarthy was elected Speaker, he was able to win mainstream Republicans over to positions held by the Freedom Caucus, Stirewalt said, which in turn allowed McCarthy to establish his bona fides as a right-wing media star. But once in power, McCarthy had to make deals with Democrats to keep the government functioning. The cycle eventually caught up with him, as it is likely to do with anyone in his position, even a Fox News regular like Jordan, Stirewalt said. Jim Jordan used Fox News and the right-of-center media to great effect over the past decade to force his way into the conference, to force his way into leadership and create all these pressure points, Stirewalt said. So after this long struggle, you hear people saying, we have to stop here. The revolution has to stop here. But I don't see why anyone feels like they have to go along now and behave themselves. Mariana Sotomayor contributed to this report.